Good morning. This is Dr. Charles Hawker. I'm a professor of pathology at the University of Utah School of Medicine in Salt Lake City, and also scientific director for automation at ARUP Laboratories. And it's my pleasure to present this webinar on how automation is required in order for a laboratory to achieve Six Sigma quality in non-analytic metrics. First, a disclosure. I've already stated I'm an employee of ARUP Laboratories. The main objectives of this presentation are to be sure that you have an understanding of the definition of Six Sigma quality, and then we'll also provide some examples of activities that you could perform in your laboratory to improve your non-analytic quality. May not be able to achieve Six Sigma quality, but you're moving in that direction. So, as an introduction, I think anyone who's working in the clinical laboratory area has heard this information many times. Clinical laboratories are under increasing economic pressure. This, in turn, creates demands for improved productivity. The laboratory workforce is aging, and there's a very inadequate pipeline of trained replacements for the people who are retiring or leaving the field. Also, improving patient safety is a very important goal, and this requires continuous improvement in both non-analytic and analytic quality. In addition to written processes, training, checklists, vigilance, and a list of other things that can be undertaken, continuous quality improvement and process re-engineering using Lean and Six Sigma techniques are really needed to improve quality on an overall basis. And then adding automation, robotics, enhanced software, and advanced processes to these written procedures, training, checklists, vigilance, etc., is what's required to push the non-analytic quality to Six Sigma levels. However, there are certain activities that each lab could implement which will improve their own non-analytic quality metrics without an investment in expensive automation. And this may not lead to Six Sigma levels, but these activities can still improve quality, and I will provide some examples of those. But the main purpose of the presentation is to show how automation really is required to get to that Six Sigma quality level, because that's very difficult to reach. So what is Six Sigma quality? Well, Six Sigma is a process improvement initiative used to drive defects from processes. It really makes use of statistics. And the goal is to create near perfection through this continuous improvement. The measured quality is usually expressed as defects per million opportunities, or DPMO. And so I've listed here on this chart what the error rate is for 1 sigma, 2 sigma, and so on, up to 6 sigma. And as you can see, the defects per million opportunities for 6 sigma is only 3.4 defects per million opportunities, which could be per million tests or per million specimens or some measure like that in the laboratory. But opportunities can refer to more than just specimens or tests, because you might count different handling steps as an opportunity for an error or something on that sort. In our lab sections in our laboratory, the threshold for corrected reports is 2 per 10,000. So if you just simply look at this chart of the sigma levels, 5 sigma is 233 errors per million, which is 2.33 per 10,000. So the threshold for good performance in our technical laboratory sections is slightly more than 5 sigma. But I can assure you that that's a very challenging goal. And I think if you look at your own error levels in your own laboratory, you'll see why Six Sigma is so elusive and so difficult to reach. It's nearly 80 times more difficult than 5 Sigma. So this chart about error rates, I have modified from presentations done by Mike Astian at the University of Washington and the Seattle Children's Hospital. And he in turn based this chart on a published report by Dr. Racer, and the citation is given at the bottom of the slide. Down the left side are different error rates from 1 to 1,000 to 1 to 1 million. And in the center are some different processes and methods that might be used to achieve those error rates. And then on the right are some examples of certain activities in a laboratory setting that probably meet those particular error rates. And as I said, this is a slide that was originally presented by Dr. Astian. So for example, hand washing. You require all employees to wash their hands as they're leaving the laboratory before they go anywhere else. But clearly some employees forget to do it. What do you think the error rate is for that? Well, I suspect it's worse than 1 in 1,000, but for most of our laboratories. But perhaps I'm mistaken in that assumption. But in any case, in order to train or teach employees to wash their hands as leaving the laboratory, you have clear processes. You do very important education about it. There's training and there's vigilance, and employees tend to police each other even if the supervisor is not there to watch the employees wash their hands. So that's an example of a process and that maybe achieves the 1 in 1,000 error rate. And then there are some examples of things that are at the 1 in 10,000 error rate. For example, requisition order errors or suboptimal specimens. There are some examples of measures that are at the 1 to 100,000 error rate. Dr. Astian has mislabeled specimens and corrected reports. And then there's examples of error rates at the 1 to 1 million, which he lists lost specimens, interfaced result entry, and barcode reading. However, I, in particular, because of my many years of experience in the laboratory, I don't particularly agree with Dr. Astian's estimations on time. I believe that there are many published reports about mislabeled specimens that show the error rates to be much worse than the 1 to 100,000 that he had in the previous slide. There are numerous reports published of CAP Q-probe studies that show error rates on the order of 1 in 2,000 or 1 in 3,000. And so it's, or 1 in 1,000, and I even know of a report where the error rate for labeled specimens in blood banks in clinical laboratories was worse than 1%, 1 per 100. So I have simply moved mislabeled specimens up a grouping here to the 1 in 10,000. Lost specimens I have moved up from the 1 in 1 million to 1 in 100,000 because, again, I have 40 years of experience and I know that specimens get lost, and I know what our experience has been at our laboratory at ARUP. 1 in 1 million is better than 6 sigma, and so I know how difficult that would be to achieve. So what I want to do over these next few slides is show you the history of lost specimens in our laboratory. Across the baseline on the bottom of the slide is, and I'm moving the cursor along the bottom of the slide, and hopefully you all can see that, are the years starting in 1991 through 2013. And the ordinate is a log scale of the ratio of lost specimens per 100,000 total specimens. So starting at the very top, we have 100 lost specimens per 100,000 total specimens, or 1 per 1,000. And then the next major mark is 100 per 100,000, excuse me, 10 per 100,000. The next mark is 1 per 100,000. And then at the bottom is 0.1 per 100,000. So the Six Sigma line is indicated by this green line, which would be 0.34 per 100,000, or the 3.4 per million, or DPMO. The 5 Sigma line is the red line, 23.3 per 100,000. And you could see this history, let me go back a slide. You could see this history for the first early years from 1991 through 1997 of an improvement in the rate of lost specimens, because we were tracking it, and because there was a significant process improvement indicated by this slide, which in this case was not allowing our lab sections to directly call the clients to request a replacement specimen because the specimen had been lost. We simply allowed the labs to tell client services, please call the client, we can't find the specimen. And it turned out we knew that we hadn't lost them, we had misplaced them. And we set up a process which required this to be reviewed before the client would be called. And so this process of not letting that call go out directly, but doing a review and a search for the specimen, we eliminated many of those phone calls, and that's where you see this decline and improvement in the rate of lost specimens. So then, shown on this chart is a whole group of monthly versus previously those were annual figures. These are monthly measures of lost specimens per 100,000 total specimens, extending from about 1998 to 2003, so adding on to the previous chart. And you can see this downward trend sort of continues, mostly in the first several years, and then it sort of seems to level off a bit from 2001 to 2003. Well, there were two things that happened that contributed to this information, this data. First, we made some significant automation. We installed a transport and sorting system, which also included storage sorting. And we made a process improvement, which was to go from an assembly line process in our specimen processing to individual workstations where each employee was responsible for the entire process of ordering the test or checking the order if it had been transmitted through an interface, and then labeling the specimen, verifying it, labeling the specimen, and so on. So by making, instead of having those steps split up in an assembly line, they were all handled by one employee, and it was actually more efficient, but it also reduced errors, and in this case it also contributed to reducing lost specimens. So here's just an example of that early automation that was installed in 1998, a conveyor system. These were lines that fed into this loop conveyor system. There are three high-speed sorters for sorting specimens for the labs and a sorter for storage sorting. So then this chart shows lost specimens from 2003 to about 2008 or 9 added on. So now you can see this downward trend continuing on a pretty continuous basis with a big drop starting in 2003 or 2004, and then it sort of does admittedly level off a little bit. So again, we had process improvements and we had automation that contributed to these improvements that followed this leveling off period in 2003. For automation, we had a major expansion of that track transport and sorting system, including more sorters, and we installed our automated robotic storage freezer, our ASRS. And for process improvement, we had really automated the whole process for storage and retrieval. And that storage system made a tremendous improvement in reducing our lost specimen rates. So here now you see the expanded track system. Here's all of specimen processing, and there are 8 high-speed sorters sorting the specimens for the tests. And this on the right is the 2-story storage freezer, which is shown in this following slide, just a simple CAD drawing, and you see a figure of an employee at one end where specimens would be retrieved. And all of these are storage shelves that are accessed by robotic systems. That system can hold 2.3 million specimens, and we can retrieve a specimen in about 2.5 minutes on average. Then here is the completion of the chart. So you see from 2008 to 2013, again, a continual decline in the rate of lost specimens per 100,000 total specimens received. Again, this is, as I said at the beginning, this is a log scale through here. And there are 3 dots that are shown in green because those 3 monthly points have crossed the 6 sigma line. What were the improvements that led to this latest decline? Well, one was the installation of a sort-to-light system. The sort-to-light system was an automation system invented in-house to sort based on the barcode those specimens that were not placed on the automated track system. It's what we would call manual specimens. And a process improvement that also contributed to this was the installation of what we call pods in specimen processing department. So this is the sort-to-light system, sort of a little bit like, reminds you maybe of Hollywood Squares. The employee has one of these manual specimens that can't go on the track in their hand. They read the barcode, and this little lighted square lights up, and that's the bin that they place that specimen in. It has eliminated a lot of missorted specimens because previously they had to read the label to find the department or lab section where that specimen was supposed to go. And so a lot of specimens were getting missorted and misdelivered, and then we had to trust that people would bring them back or whatever. So that's the sort-to-light system, and there's a section like this for ambient specimens and a section for frozen specimens and another section for refrigerated specimens. We're now building more of those systems to greatly expand that thing. And then here is the specimen processing department, and you see these what are called pods. Maybe hard to see unless you're looking at this full screen, but employees are seated together in clusters of 4. So the 4 employees all work on a shipment at the same time together. It makes those employees more efficient, and all of the specimens from the same client would be there together. So if one employee is working on the frozens and another one's working on the refrigerateds or whatever, it makes them more efficient and less likely to lose a specimen or misplace a specimen. So we've talked a bit about Six Sigma analysis, and I've given you the definition already of 3.4 defects per million opportunities. In the case of lost specimens, each time a specimen is handled is really an opportunity that the employee could misplace it or lose it. And since our laboratory has an average of 1.6 build units or tests per specimen, it's really each test that represents an opportunity to lose the specimen, because each test is a separate handling of that specimen. Therefore, I think a more correct assessment of Six Sigma quality is not using total lost specimens as the denominator, but using total build units as the denominator. And so that's shown on the next slide. And we can't go back to the early years prior to 1997 because the government changed the definition of build units in 1997. But this is the same data from the previous slides that I showed you through 2013, but simply using 100,000 total build units as the denominator. And now you can see there are 9 green dots that are below the Six Sigma line. And I've already explained how all of this automation and process improvement is what drove us to that quality level. We're continuing to make numerous improvements to our automation, and I think there's still an opportunity to drive this trend even further. So let me go back to Dr. Astian's chart, and the overall contention that he made that automation, robotics, software enhancements, advanced process design is what's really necessary to drive quality down towards Six Sigma levels. And we're not quite at 1 to 1 million, but I think you can see from the data that I presented that lost specimens, we are certainly down in the neighborhood of better than 1 to 100,000 for most of those. If you see on this chart, this black line is the 1 per 100,000. So most of those are now better than that, and with some points at better than 0.34 per 100,000. So at Six Sigma levels. Let's talk a bit about mislabeled specimens as the other example that I've highlighted here. So mislabeled specimens in the United States and our laboratory. I mentioned that there are some published data about mislabeled specimens, and depending on the publication, the error rates range from 0.04% to as high as 5% in some of these different published studies. So one early College of American Pathologists Q-probe study that was published in the Archives of Pathology and Lab Medicine by Wallenstein and Raab and their colleagues showed an error rate of 0.39 per 100,000. Then a couple of years later, there was a publication of another CAP Q-probe study. 147 U.S. clinical labs participated voluntarily in this study, and the overall error rate was almost 1 per 1,000, 0.92, I think, per 1,000 specimens. Again, published in the Archives of Pathology and Lab Medicine. A third CAP Q-probe study was published in 2010. In this case, 122 U.S. laboratories that had blood bank operations, and they reported an average incidence of mislabeled specimens of 1.12%. Now, I don't want people to walk away thinking that the country's blood supply is in danger because of mislabeled specimens. These errors were corrected before there was any patient safety concern. It's just a mislabeling that handled in the first step of the process, and then in a subsequent step, it was corrected. But this gives you an idea of how significant the mislabeled specimen issue is in the United States. In our laboratory, our historic measured error rate in specimen processing was about 1 per 10,000. So perhaps 1/4 to 1/10 of those published levels above. In addition, we believe that our, quote, downstream inspections and corrections, we're finding and correcting about 95% of those errors of 1 in 10,000. So that errors that got out the door, that escaped our inspection, were perhaps on the order of 1 per 200,000. So that's what we believed. However, we felt that that wasn't good enough. A mislabeled specimen is quite significant. And here is a summary that is available on the CAP website, and there's a citation or link at the bottom of the slide, concerning a poster presented by one of my colleagues, Dr. Steve Kahn at Loyola University, giving an average hypothetical cost of a mislabeled specimen of $712, which excludes patient anxiety and discomfort, delays in diagnosis and treatment, and all of that. But it's really the administrative charges associated with recollecting and retesting the specimen, the patient taking off of work or coming in to have a specimen redrawn, and so forth. These were not actual incurred costs, but they were the costs that that might have been billed to third-party payers or whatever if the error was followed up in that fashion. And on the CAP website that has this discussion, they have taken the incidence of mislabeled specimens published by, let me go back to that. They've taken the incidence published by Wallenstein and Raab in Archives of Pathology and Lab Medicine of 0.39 per 1,000 and simply multiplied it by the $712 in hypothetical costs for each mislabel. And it simply means, if you do the math, that for every 1 million specimens tested in the United States, $280,000 in costs are added to the U.S. healthcare system. So that's a pretty significant number, because we obviously know that many, many millions of tests are being done. So in our laboratory, we decided we would try to drive mislabeled specimens to zero. And for the past 8 years, I've been involved in a research project to develop a high-speed automated camera system that could photograph the outside of a specimen tube, the entire labels that are on the outside of the tube, and use optical character recognition, or OCR, to see if that specimen has been mislabeled. So this is a little schematic simply showing a conveyor system with cylindrical objects moving down a conveyor, and here are 4 cameras, each aimed, they're equidistantly spaced, and they're each aimed at the tube or the part, and then the system assembles the 4 photographs into a single photograph. So you're taking a cylindrical or 3-dimensional image of the outside of the tube, and you've made it into a 2-dimensional image, and then you can do OCR analysis. That's the principle. This is a CAD drawing of the system next to our automated conveyor. And at this point, we're going to play a video for you of the system in operation. This video clip shows the operation of the system that was developed to detect mislabeled specimens. As shown in this scene, specimens are being transported in carriers on our automation system. They are stopped at a precise point, enabling a robot to pick the tubes out of the carrier and lift them up to the vision system. This stopping point is directly in front of a red backlight, and with the aid of a 45-degree mirror, a smart camera, which is shown in the right foreground, measures the tube's height and the diameter of the cap. This enables the robot to securely grasp the cap and lift the tube. This view shows more of the entire system. The robot is on the right. On the left is the operator's computer screen, which shows each image as it is acquired and the results of the OCR analysis. In this view, of course, all protected health information has been blurred so that it can't be read. However, you can see the screen change to a new image as each tube is photographed and analyzed. The cycle time for one tube ranges from 2.5 to 3.5 seconds, depending on the quality of the label. This view again shows the transport carriers, with tubes arriving at the stopping point, where the robot will lift them to the vision system. On the left you can see the 45-degree mirror that the smart camera uses to measure the tube's dimensions to guide the robot in correctly picking up the tube by its cap. This view from the top shows the robot and vision system. There are 4 equally spaced cameras with 4 reflective panels and 4 strobe lights. As you can see from this pause in the video, the strobe lights are very bright. The vision system software precisely stitches the 4 separate photographs into a single photograph, which is the entire exterior of the tube and is so sharp that OCR can be performed. Okay, so how does this OCR system classify images? You saw the photograph of the outside of the specimen container, the tube, and a portion of that is the ARUP label, and a portion of that is the customer's label. And from the ARUP label barcode, our LIS provides the patient name as a character string. And then the system looks on the area outside of the ARUP label, in other words, the customer label, or client label, to see if it can find a matching character string that matches what's in our LIS. So if a character string is found on this client label that is an exact match for what is in the patient name field in our LIS, the image is classified as a pass. If there's only a single label on the specimen tube, then that image is an automatic pass, or what we call pass as a single. It might have been mislabeled, but we have no way to know that. So if there's only one label on the tube, it's an automatic pass. If there is a client label on the tube, but it has no exactly matching character string that can be found, the image is a fail. However, it doesn't mean it was a mislabel. There are many reasons for fails. Poor label quality, unusual fonts, name being partially covered by handwriting or a felt tip marker, or by the ARUP label. Our own label might cover part of the patient name. The name could have been truncated by the client. They could have transmitted into the LIS John Henry Jones, but on the label they only printed Jones, comma, John H, or something like that as an example. In other words, there's a truncation. Names that are turned at 90 degrees to the direction of the tube. Also, we get interference from colored labels and striped labels and things like that. So everything that is a fail is going to be inspected by an employee. And somewhere among all of those fails will be the mislabels. So the whole objective is to have the computer system pass as many specimens as it can possibly pass, and then we are minimizing how many we have to inspect by hand. So here's an example of a label inspection result which was classified as a pass. This photograph that's in grayscale is the client label portion of the photograph up here. So here's the barcode that's used to query our LIS, find out the patient name. In this particular example, the client transmitted to us, to our computer system, a dummy name of test, comma, Jodi, J-O-D-I, space, DND. So that's in our computer system. That's what we learn when we look up from this barcode. And now we're looking on the client label, or what is shown a little bit easier to see on this grayscale image, for test, comma, Jodi, DND, and there it is. So this result is a pass. However, in the next example, the client transmitted an image that was had a numeric, and we chose this so we could illustrate the performance of the system is not just alpha characters but also numeric characters. So the patient name that was transmitted was test, comma, DTS. Let's look at the label. What the client transmitted was test, comma, DTS 4587, and we intentionally changed that 7 to an 8 in our LIS after we had received the order to create a mismatch between the printed label printed by the client and what our computer system was looking for. For we were looking for the 8.8 and the client had sent us the 8.7, so it was a fail. I'm showing you here the very first mislabeled specimens that were caught by this OCR system in October of 2012. These were twin sisters, Linda and Brenda, who were drawn by the same physician, same client, same date and time for the same test. I think we've blacked out medical record numbers and last names, but fructosamine was the test that was ordered. But you can see that on the ARUP label in the lower one, B, it says Brenda, and the customer label says Linda, and then on the other one, on the ARUP label, it says Linda, and the customer label says Brenda. So they were just switched. And this is a very common occurrence, and it does occur on patients whose names aren't even similar, like they were in this one. But this was missed by our employees, both in the specimen processing and the technical section that performed the testing. And in fact, the technologist that I was working with, when I asked her, did you catch this error? No, we didn't. And she says, boy, we were set up to fail on that one, just speaking because the names were so similar. So that's how the system works. So we did a validation study of 1 million specimens between October of 2012 and the end of May of 2013. And the objectives of the validation study were, first, to minimize the total number of tubes that failed due to poor label quality, font training, incorrect positioning, all the other reasons that I gave you on the previous slide. These would be what we would call false fails. They are correctly labeled. There's not an error. It's just that the system can't read the photograph for quality issues related to the photograph. But we're trying to minimize all that human inspection or manual work, and our target as we entered the validation study was to have an 80% pass rate or a 20% fail rate. So 80% true passes and 20% false fails. In addition, our objectives were that every mislabeled tube had to be a fail. So those would be so-called true fails and would be picked up through the manual inspection process. Our target there is 100%. The inverse of that is that we had to absolutely guarantee that no mislabeled tubes would ever slip through the system and be automatically passed by the system. In other words, 0% for false passes. So those were the objectives of the validation study, which, as I said, was completed May 31st of 2013. We had over 1 million images. Every one of those 1 million images was reviewed either by myself or one of 4 other employees. I can tell you that was a lot of work, but it was necessary to validate the system. The overall pass rate was not 80% as we had hoped. It was about 75%. We still have hopes that we can get that up to closer to 80% and minimize the human labor involved in inspecting all of those fails. The important thing was we had no false passes. There were no mislabeled specimens that slipped through and were passed by the system out of 743,000 total passes. Among the mislabeled specimens in the validation study, of which there were 121, what we learned was that, first of all, the rate that we thought we had, which was 1 to 10,000, based on the historic data collected by the specimen processing department, the ratio was actually a little bit higher, 1 per 8,346. Not bad, still better than those CAP publications, but not as good as what we had thought based on the data we were capturing. But this is difficult data to capture because it requires all sorts of after-the-fact investigation, requires clients to call if they have detected an error, that sort of thing. So that's why the tendency is to miss some of your errors without an automated system like we're using here. So we were actually quite pleased with this overall performance level from our specimen processing department, that they only mislabeled 1 specimen out of every 8,300. Out of those 121 mislabeled specimens, 71 were found by the testing laboratory or editors before testing, but we had to send 46 of those on for investigation for possible correction reports. And we ended up with 21 corrected reports. Now, not always is a corrected report required. If the tests are repeated and the results are the same after the specimens have been correctly labeled, then there's no need for a corrected report. And so there are different scenarios in which a corrected report would not be required. But we did end up sending out 21 corrected reports out of those 121 mislabels. One of the values of the system, however, is that we also find specimens which we call mismatched. They're primarily spelling errors. So, for example, the client label has a patient named Kristen, K-R-I-S-T-E-N. And our label, our laboratory's label, has Kristen spelled K-R-I-S-T-I-N. So T-E-N or T-I-N. It's the same patient. The medical record numbers, the date of birth, collection date and time, all of the other parameters match. It's just that spelling error. If all of those other parameters match, we continue on with testing. But if those other parameters don't match, our policies are to call the client and verify that the patient spelling and make sure what we report is the correct spelling. As it turns out, this system found 148 of those so-called mismatched names, and employees had only found about 1/3 of those prior to testing. So that's an additional value of this OCR system. And we were very fortunate to have the publication on this system accepted and published in Clinical Chemistry in March of this year, a couple of months ago. And it was a great honor to have that article accompanied by an editorial by Dr. Robin Felder. So the current results on this system through last week we've now run 2.87 million images. The mislabel ratio has dropped a bit to 1 in 7,500, still better than the published reports from the College of American Pathologists. But of those 382 mislabels, about 54%, 207, were found prior to testing. We also have identified 819 specimens as mismatched or with spelling errors, and we're identifying, our employees are finding about 28% of those prior to testing. As of last week, we've sent 40 corrected reports to clients. Now, that's not that much bigger a number than the 21 before. It turns out that in February of 2013, we moved this system from one automated track to a different automated track. And the first track that the system was on delivered the specimens to our high-volume automated core laboratory where specimens are tested non-stop, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they test so quickly that they don't often catch the errors. And so 17 of the errors were while the specimens were being delivered to the core lab. And they had a total of 636,000 specimens for which we had collected images and done OCR analysis. So that error ratio was one corrected report for every 37,416 images that we collected with the system. When we moved that system to a different track, the specimens went to a different laboratory section that wasn't running their tests every day of the week. It's the immunology laboratory. Some of them, the testing is higher volume and is run constantly, but some of it is lower volume, and some of the tests are run twice a week or 3 times a week or that sort of thing. And what that meant was that the OCR was actually in time. I should mention that we don't review these OCR images right on the spot. The review by an employee is the next day, or in the case of weekend specimens, it's on Monday. So it's after the fact. But in the case of the laboratory section immunology, where the testing is not done constantly, often we were able to tell them of this error before testing was completed or testing was even started. And so the error rate has dropped significantly. The corrected reports sent to clients has dropped to a ratio of 1 per 97,000, just simply showing what the power of this system is, and that if we can promptly review those images, we'll in fact eliminate any corrected reports. And that's our ultimate goal. We're going to be building 4 more of these systems as shown by these arrows across here. Here's our 4 different tracks in specimen processing. We're going to build 4 more of these systems in this coming year. And we will set up for employees to review those images promptly. And we believe we can drive corrected reports related to mislabeled specimens to near 0. So, what can you do in your laboratory to improve your quality? I've talked about lost specimens and mislabeled specimens, but let me just give you some ideas that you can do that don't involve the sophisticated automation that we have in our laboratory. So reducing lost specimens is all about tracking. Even if you don't have automation, you need to have some mechanisms for tracking the specimens, where they're going and who's handling them. You can use your LIS to track specimens from specimen processing. In our Cerner LIS system, we have a status called Central Collect, which is the status the specimens are in once they have been ordered in specimen processing. Once they're delivered to the lab sections, they're brought to what's called in-lab status in the Cerner system. This requires an extra barcode read in the labs to verify the receipt of the specimens, but it's a useful tracking step to have the labs read the barcode on the specimen once the specimen's in their hands. For specimens being transported to the lab from clinics or affiliated hospitals, I believe you could use barcodes to create transfer lists. So you'd have a transfer list of 20 or 30 specimens or however many, and that whole sheet, transfer list number such and such, would have a barcode. You just read one barcode and you're essentially taking receipt of the transfer of those specimens from point A to point B. You can require employees to check out the specimens if you have a centralized storage system. In many laboratories, employees just simply go in the computer system and find the location of the stored specimen, tray or rack number such and such, row number, column number, and so on, and they take the specimen. Nobody knows who took the specimen. We had that going on in our laboratory for a while until finally everybody got frustrated. I had said from the beginning, require employees to check the specimens out, and no one believed me. Finally, after several years, they took my advice, and we don't allow employees to get specimens without entering their ID. In fact, it's a barcode-based system, so they have to use their employee badge, which has a barcode. If you don't have your badge, you can't check out specimens. Mislabeled specimens can be reduced by using wireless bedside phlebotomy systems, where the wireless system queries the LIS, gets the current orders, prints specimen labels for those orders. You're at the patient bedside, and so that process is initiated by reading the patient's wristband barcode. Not that many laboratories or hospitals are set up with this kind of a system yet, probably in the neighborhood of 10 to 20%, but that's something that, although expensive, is a huge step towards reducing mislabeled specimens. Also, I strongly recommend that laboratories implement the CLSI standard Auto 12A on specimen label formats. What is the CLSI standard Auto 12A? It was a standard published 3 years ago in which the format for a label, as shown on these two examples, specifies patient name on the top line of the label. As our committee reviewed a lot of different label formats, we found the patient name anywhere on the label, from first line, second line, third line, fourth line, fifth line, above the barcode, below the barcode, left justified, right justified, sometimes in the middle, and sometimes turned 90 degrees to the orientation of the rest of the label and the orientation of the tube. And so this standard is not concerned with the barcode. That's a different CLSI standard, Auto 2, but this standard is concerned with the human readable content. So patient name, and there in the standard are specified font types, font sizes, and formats. So patient name on the first line, unique secondary identifier, usually a medical record number or a financial number, is on the second line, left justified. Right justified is patient date of birth, age, and sex. Then below the barcode, left justified, is the collection date and time and a phlebotomist ID, and the rest of the region below the barcode is left for the laboratory to choose for their optional information. And there's a version of this label that has a priority code down the left side of the label. So this priority code would be easily visible if the tubes were in a rack or whatever, because the standard requires that these labels be placed so they're readable as they are now if the top of the tube, the cap or the stopper, is on the left end of the, is to the left of the label. So in summary, experience in our laboratory over 22 years in implementing process improvements and automation has led to a steady reduction in lost specimens to a level consistently below 1 per 100,000 build units, and in some months in the 6 sigma region, in other words, less than 0.34 per 100,000. Also, we have new OCR technology for identifying possible mislabeled specimens, and this technology has the prospect of perhaps someday achieving 6 sigma quality levels when we have it fully implemented in our automation. And I have provided several improvement suggestions for use in your laboratories that can offer opportunities to achieve meaningful reductions in error rates without some of these expensive automation systems. So thank you, and on this slide is the information about where you can get continuing education credits. At this point, I'm happy to take questions, and I will look at the questions that have been submitted and read them and give you some responses. So the first the first question is, did we investigate errors on PT wrist barcode? We have not. However, that has been published in clinical chemistry by a group from Emory University. The first author's name was Snyder, S-N-Y-D-E-R. I don't have the citation in front of me, but I'm going to say it was fall of 2011 or 2012. And I'm sorry I can't be more specific. But the Emory group investigated barcode errors associated with the wristband barcodes, and primarily most of the errors were occurring with different point-of-care reading devices. So their overall project, they improved the quality of the wristband barcodes, but then they standardized on some of the barcode reading devices and added check digits and a number of other improvements, and it's a very informative article. So that appears to be the only question that was submitted. So with that, I thank you for attending this conference today. I've enjoyed presenting it to you, and I hope you will look at other BioConference Live presentations. Thank you very much.